Hello everyone, and welcome to the Rhode Island Department of Education Summer Food Service Program new sponsor training series. This training will specifically focus on the meal pattern and include several relevant topics like the meal pattern minimum requirements by meal type, meal components, meal pattern documentation, meal modification, and meal service. To start, we will do a general overview of the food components that comprise the meal pattern requirements for each meal period. The four food components are milk, fruit and/or vegetable, grain, and meat alternate. In order for a meal to be considered reimbursable, you must serve the required components of a meal type in the minimum required amount. Not every meal type will require that all of these components be served. The specific food component requirements for each meal type will be discussed further in the next slides. Next, we will do a general overview of the meal pattern requirements for each meal period, which include breakfast, lunch, supper, and snack. This overview of the meal pattern will be in reference to a style of meal service referred to as straight serve, which is the most common style. However, we will go over meal service styles in depth later in this training. If RIDE conducts a program review and finds meals to be missing components or not served in the minimum portion sizes, we may disallow those meals, so it is important to understand what is expected of you. First, we will review the breakfast meal pattern, which can be seen on your screen. There are three required components for this meal period: milk, fruit or vegetable, and grain or bread. The milk component requires a minimum of 1 cup of fluid milk be served. Within the SFSP, there is no fat content requirement, and milk can be flavored or unflavored. The fruit vegetable component must be served in a minimum quantity of a ½ cup. Sponsors can elect to meet this component solely with a fruit or vegetable, or, alternately, with a combination of fruits and vegetables. Finally, you must serve 1 serving of a grain or bread. Each food item within this component has a different minimum required amount, since the amount of grain in each product varies. Lunch and supper follow the same meal pattern and are the most common meal types served in the SFSP. While breakfast only has 3 required components, lunch and supper have 5 required components. The components are milk, 2 servings of fruit and/or vegetable, grain or bread, and meat or meat alternate, which we refer to as MMA. Similar to the milk component in breakfast, the minimum required serving amount for lunch and supper is 1 cup, with no restrictions on fat content and flavoring. The grain or bread component must be served in a minimum of 1 serving based on the type of grain or bread used. The meat alternate component also has varying serving sizes based on which food item you intend to credit towards the component. Finally, the entire fruit or vegetable components must be a minimum of 3/4 cup, meaning both servings combined must meet the serving size. You must ensure that you are serving 2 different fruit or vegetable items that are not composed of the same item. So, for example, you may not serve apple slices and applesauce to meet the fruit vegetable component, as both food items are apple-based. You can serve more than 2 fruit or vegetables to meet the 3/4 cup minimum requirement. However, each fruit or vegetable that will contribute to this component cannot be served in a quantity smaller than 1/8 cup. A sample of a reimbursable lunch or supper would be 1 cup of fluid 1% milk, a ½ cup of brown rice, 2 ounces of grilled chicken, a ½ cup of roasted carrots, and a ¼ cup of fresh bell pepper. You can find further meal pattern documents, trainings, and webinars on the RIDE Child Nutrition Program SFSP homepage, which will be linked at the end of this presentation. The final meal type is snack. This meal type can be served at various points throughout the day, like AM snack or PM snack, but the meal pattern is the same regardless of when you serve it. You need to serve 2 of the 4 available food components in their respective minimum quantities. Note that you only need 1 fruit or vegetable to contribute to the fruit-vegetable component, but that 1 food item must be served in at least a 3/4 cup serving. Additionally, you may not serve 2 liquids, such as orange juice and milk, for snack. Many of the component serving sizes remain the same for snack as other meal types, with the exception of meat alternate. As mentioned before, the milk you serve in your meals or snacks can be any fat content, such as whole, reduced fat or 2%, low fat or 1%, skim, fat-free, or lactose-reduced milk. You can also serve milk as unflavored or flavored, such as chocolate milk. When purchasing milk, you should consider what quantities to buy it in. Will you purchase individual 8-ounce cartons? These may be more expensive, but take the guesswork out of making sure enough milk is served and could result in avoiding potential disallowances. Or will you get milk by the gallon and pour out 8 ounces for each participant? This may save money, but can lead to sponsors underpouring and therefore not serving enough milk, which could have a fiscal impact. On this slide, you see some guidelines around the service of the milk component as it relates to the meal periods. The last point is in reference to serving milk alternatives due to a medical exemption. While we will talk about this in depth later in the presentation, please be aware that only certain non-dairy beverages are allowed based on the medical exemption, and that you must have documentation in the form of a medical statement that is signed by a licensed physician or qualified healthcare professional. Within the fruit-vegetable component, you can opt to serve vegetables from any of the vegetable subgroups or 100% vegetable juice. Similarly, you can serve any kind of fruit to meet this component or 100% fruit juice. You may also serve full-strength juice that contains a combination of fruit and vegetables. This slide highlights more guidelines to be considered for the fruit-vegetable component. As mentioned before, a fruit, vegetable, or full-strength juice must be served at breakfast. For lunch, you must serve 2 or more kinds of vegetables and or fruits to meet the minimum required amount of 3/4 cup. You are allowed to serve up to half of this component as a juice for lunch or supper. Dry beans or peas can be credited toward either the fruit-vegetable component or the meat alternate within a meal. They cannot credit towards both meal components within the same meals. For information of how these items credit towards each of these components, please refer to the SFSP meal pattern requirements on the USDA meal pattern webpage. Additionally, please note that dried fruits can be used to meet this component and credit in a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning that 1/4 cup of dried fruit credits as 1/4 cup fruit. Additional guidelines for the fruit-vegetable component include the following. Fruit that is sold as part of a commercially prepared yogurt cannot count towards this component. This is applicable regardless of how it is incorporated into the yogurt package. However, sponsors can add their own fruit to yogurt and credit that fruit to this component. Any foods that are added in small amounts, primarily as a garnish or flavoring agent, cannot be credited towards this component. This includes small amounts of onions, pickles, relish, ketchup, etc. As mentioned earlier, you cannot serve 2 fruit or vegetable that are based on the same fruit-vegetable item. So you could not serve oranges and orange juice, as they are both orange-based products. Finally, as a reminder, you cannot serve 2 liquids, such as juice and milk, together for a reimbursable snack. Unlike other child nutrition programs, there is no whole grain requirement for the grain component within the SFSP. While whole grains are not required, we strongly encourage all sponsors to provide as many whole grain items as they can to ensure youth are provided with the most nutritious meals possible. This slide provides you with examples of both allowable whole grain and enriched items. When selecting a grain to serve, you must ensure that it is either whole grain, enriched, or made from whole grain or enriched flour or meal. When used as part of the main dish, items like pie crust are considered to be allowable to credit toward the grain component. Additionally, when serving non-sweet grain-based snacks like hard pretzels, breadsticks, and chips that are primarily composed of whole grain or enriched flour, these items can be credited towards the grain component. Again, we strongly encourage all sponsors to utilize whole grain items whenever possible to provide additional vitamins, minerals, and fiber to meals of participants. There are a number of food items that can credit toward the meat alternate. Some groups of items are meat, fish, poultry, eggs, cheese, beans and peas, nuts, seeds, and yogurt. Not each of these items credits towards this component the same way, so you will need to be sure that you meet the minimum required serving amounts for the respective item. Please note that creditable yogurt offered in the SFSP can be flavored, unflavored, unsweetened, sweetened, and any fat content. As already stated, when using dry beans or peas in your meal, they cannot credit towards both the vegetable and MMA component. You must select only one component for them to credit towards entirely. MMAs can often be seen in what we refer to as a combination item. This means that the food item credits towards the MMA component, but also contains a food item that contributes to another component, typically the grain component. An example of a combination MMA item would be a chicken patty. The chicken itself within the patty contributes to the MMA, but the breading surrounding it can contribute to the grain component. Any combination item needs to have either child nutrition labels, also known as a CN label, or product formulation statements, or PFS for short. We will talk about these forms of documentation later in this presentation, but these are important pieces of documentation as they tell you how much of the product credits towards each component, and you will need to keep the forms on file for validation purposes. Nuts and seeds can be used to meet all of the MMA for a snack and up to half the MMA requirement for lunch and supper. You will need to be mindful when using yogurt to credit for the MMA, as 4 ounces only credits for 1 ounce MMA. So in order to meet the 2-ounce MMA requirement for lunch or supper, you will need to serve 8 ounces of yogurt. Note that items like homemade yogurt, frozen yogurt, or other yogurt products like yogurt bars and yogurt-covered fruit are not creditable. As mentioned earlier, combination MMA items will need either a CN label or PFS. While we mentioned that combination items could include an MMA and a grain, there are some processed items, like deli meat, that will also need a CN label or PFS. While this item will only credit towards the MMA component, this type of documentation is needed to know how it credits in terms of quantity. Since deli meats often have fillers and other items added to them, a 2-ounce portion of this item will not contain 2 ounces of actual meat. A CN label or PFS will tell you how much of an item you need to serve in order to credit a certain amount towards a component. For example, a CN label may tell you that you need to serve 3 ounces of the deli meat to achieve a 2-ounce serving of actual meat. Other processed or combination items that will require CN labels or PFS could include frozen pizza or pizza bites, meatballs, canned chili, canned soup, ravioli, and frozen breakfast wraps or sandwiches. On the screen, you see an example of a child nutrition or CN label. CN labels are administered by the Food and Nutrition Service branch of the USDA. CN labels are only eligible for products that credit toward the MMA component. So if you wanted to find out how many mini pancakes to serve for breakfast, you would need to keep a PFS on file, since there would be no CN label for this item, as it does not credit towards a meat or meat alternate. You can locate the relevant crediting information of the CN label inside the black outlined box towards the bottom of the label that has the lettering of CN on each side of the box. Upon reading the information inside, you will find that 5 of these half-ounce meatballs will credit towards 2 ounces of the MMA when cooked. So if you were looking to use these meatballs as the only item to credit towards the MMA component of your lunch or supper, you would need to serve 5 meatballs to each participant. If you were to use these meatballs as one of your 2 components for a snack, you would only need 1 ounce for the MMA. Based on this, you would need to serve 2.5 meatballs per participant. However, it may not be feasible or realistic to expect a sponsor to cut meatballs in half, so a sponsor can elect to serve 3 meatballs to each participant, since that will meet and exceed the minimum required portion size of 1 ounce. Moving on to the other form of combination food documentation is the Product Formulation Statement, or PFS. These forms of documentation are not verified by USDA, but are completed by the manufacturers themselves. Any food items that are not creditable cannot be paid for with SFSP funds. So if you plan to purchase items like ice cream or food items for a meal period you are not approved for, along with creditable approved items, you will need to establish a system to make sure you can separate out the cost for the non-creditable items. Condiments that you plan to use for reimbursable meals are not subject to the previously mentioned restriction and can be paid for with program funds. It is likely that at some point in your operation, you will need to modify your meals to accommodate participants with allergies or various lifestyle or religious affiliations. As a sponsor, you are required to make reasonable modifications to meals or snacks that you serve, or to the meal service itself. If a modification causes a sponsor undue hardship, then they are not required to make the modification. If you are unsure if a modification is causing undue hardship, please contact your RIDE program specialist to help determine this. If you modify any of your meals or snacks, but still follow the meal pattern, then you do not need to keep any documented medical statements on file, and the meal is still considered to be reimbursable. For example, if you serve chicken tacos with salsa, corn salad, and milk for lunch or supper, you could modify your meal to be suitable for a vegetarian lifestyle while still meeting all components of the meal pattern. You could offer another variation of the same meal by substituting the chicken for black beans. By doing so, the tortillas would credit towards the grain, the black beans would credit as a meat alternate, the salsa and corn salad would comprise the 2 required fruit or vegetable components, and the milk would, obviously, credit towards the milk. No documentation would be needed for these alternative meals as they meet all required components and are fully reimbursable in and of themselves. If there is a participant that has an allergy of any sort that is considered to be a disability, you must accommodate their needs as they are a civil rights protected class. As mentioned before, if you believe accommodating an allergy will cause your operation undue hardship, please reach out to someone within RIDE's Child Nutrition Program team to confirm this. If any allergies require you to provide an accommodation that is outside the meal pattern, you must obtain and keep on file a medical statement signed by a licensed physician or medical professional. Medical statements must include the applicable allergy, foods that should be omitted, and if there are any specific substitutions that should be made. So if a child is allergic to dairy milk, the medical statement should inform you that fluid dairy milk should be excluded from the child's diet and what the appropriate substitution should be. From there, you could serve the participant soy milk or any other non-dairy milk based on if a substitution for a specific non-dairy milk or other substitution is made, and still claim the meal for reimbursement. Earlier in the presentation, we mentioned that the meal pattern charts were based on a style of meal service called straight serve. Straight service means that you serve all the required components of a given meal or snack at once to participants. This is the most utilized style of service, but other styles of meal service exist, such as family style and offer versus serve. In family style service, the food is often placed in large common vessels on the table in which each participant is served from. Site staff often dine with participants to help serve food, when necessary, and encourage participants to serve themselves and eat a well-balanced meal. This can help to create a sense of community and offer a relaxing environment for participants to eat in. If implemented correctly, family-style service can help promote and develop healthy eating habits and attitudes towards foods. Offer versus serve, or OVS, can only be implemented by sponsors who are school food authorities, or SFAs. It allows some flexibility and choices to be made by participants so that they do not need to be served all components of each meal. This style of service can also be an avenue to create less food waste within your operation. SFAs must serve a certain amount and type of food items across specified food components, and the participants can select which items they would like. If they select the required minimum amount of food items and components, then the meal will be considered eligible for reimbursement. We will discuss the specifics of these requirements shortly. Please note that you cannot use OVS for only some food components or items. You must serve all food items and components within a meal in the style of OVS. As previously mentioned, for SFAs who implement OVS, it can help reduce food waste and in turn your food costs, while simultaneously maintaining the nutritional integrity of the program. OVS can be used at breakfast, lunch, and supper meal periods only, and cannot be used for snacks. All food items must be offered in the minimum required portion sizes relative to the meal period. As a reminder, in traditional straight serve style of breakfast, a sponsor would serve 3 food components: milk, fruit or vegetable, and grain. When utilizing OVS for this meal period, an SFA will have to offer at least 1 food item within those 3 baseline components, as well as an additional food item from any of the following components: a meat alternate, fruit or vegetable, or a grain. That means you may end up offering 2 food items within the same food component. In total, you will have to offer 4 different food items, meaning they cannot be comprised of the same base food. You would not be able to serve oranges and orange juice as 2 different food items since they both are orange-based. For a meal to be considered reimbursable, a participant must take a minimum of 3 different food items. So for example, if you offer milk, oranges, cereal, and scrambled eggs, and a participant takes an orange and 2 servings of cereal, that is not a reimbursable meal. While the participant took 3 food items, they did not take 3 different food items. A participant taking milk, orange, and cereal would be considered reimbursable, as all the food items are different. Additionally, if a participant takes all 4 offered food items, that is also considered to be reimbursable. Lunch and supper OVS operates similarly to breakfast. However, with lunch and supper, you will remember that within straight serve, there are 5 food items that must be served across 4 food components. To operate OVS for this meal period, you must offer the following: milk, grain, meat or meat alternate, and fruit or vegetables, in which there are 2 different food items within this component for a meal total of 5 different food items. One major difference between breakfast OVS and lunch supper OVS is that for lunch and supper, participants must take a minimum of 3 food components. So if a participant selects the grain item and the 2 food items within the fruit vegetable group, that would not be a reimbursable meal. While the participant took 3 food items, they did not select items from 3 components. They only selected 2 food components, the fruit vegetable component and the grain component. A participant could select both food items within the fruit vegetable component, grain item, and MMA item for a total of 4 food items that come from 3 food components, and that would be a reimbursable meal. Sponsors must establish meal times for each site, and this is done in RIDE's online application management system. Once a time frame is selected, all meals included in the claim for reimbursement for that meal period need to be served within this time frame. We recommend that you give yourself a buffer when filling out this portion of the online agreement. Consider adding 15 minutes before the start and after the end of your planned meal service, just in case food is delivered either early or later than normal. RIDE may disallow meals if we see them served outside your time frame that is approved in C&P Connect. If you change your meal service times, you must update this online. These changes must be made and approved before you make any changes to your actual service. In addition to serving meals within the serving times, you also have to make sure that all meals are consumed on site and that all children receive 1 meal before any second or adult meals are served. Second meals are those you can claim separate from the first meals served to participants. Lastly, you will need to ensure that you are adhering to any local health and safety regulations. For example, you will need to make sure your milk is held on ice and that all food is properly stored during service rather than left sitting out in the sun. As mentioned in the previous slide, children must consume all meals on site. This is to ensure the general health and safety of all participants by preventing children from bringing items home that would cause potential foodborne illnesses. There are a few exceptions to this rule, one of which is that children can take 1 whole fruit, vegetable, or 1 grain item off-site for later consumption. For grain items, we recommend it be a pre-packaged item like a single-serve pack of crackers. Field trips are allowable as long as they are communicated to RIDE ahead of time in the C&P Connect system, permitting that the site has the proper means to hold the food safely. If RIDE conducts a monitoring visit and there are no participants at the site due to a field trip that was not communicated to us, then RIDE will disallow meals for that day. The intention of the SFSP is to ensure that you are preparing meals for only the number of participants that you intend to serve. You will need to have a process in place that allows you to adjust meal counts on a daily or weekly basis, with the goal of serving only 1 meal per child per meal period. Sponsors should make sure that this process offers the flexibility to find a balance between preparing or ordering an excessive amount of meals while also assuring that sites are not continuously running out of meals. While it is impossible to avoid having no leftover meals over the course of the summer, please be reminded that these meals cannot be provided to families to take home. However, leftover meals can be donated to charitable organizations if they are held correctly and allowed by your organization. The USDA understands that at open sites it's difficult to know how many people will come on a given day. Because of this, second meals can be claimed up to no more than 2% of the total first meals claimed. This allows your organization to recover some of the costs associated with the meals that were unable to be claimed as first meals. Please note, second meals must be served as a complete meal in order to be claimed for reimbursement. We know that for many of you, waste is a concern, especially when meals are unitized and items can't be chosen. To combat waste, sites can set up a share table where participants can place items that they don't want. The share table should be located somewhere after the meal service line to allow for point-of-service meal counts to be taken. Once children have received all the required food items, they can then place unwanted items on the table, in which other children can then grab the items if they want. Please be reminded that food must be held safely when utilizing share tables. This means having appropriate storage units for items that need to be held at a safe temperature, such as milk. If you have questions regarding the Summer Food Service Program, please reach out to any of the following contacts listed on the slide.